Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I am excited to share this layout that I made using the September My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I think it was this beautiful paper that absolutely inspired me and motivated me to make this page. I just absolutely love the background and the colors of this pattern paper. I started off this layout by painting the seahorse pink. For some reason, it was just calling out to be painted pink, so I used some Lindy's Pretty in Pink and I began painting it in. I did make a mistake at the top and I got a little bit of the pink paint outside of the lines. I'm going to correct that in a little while. I find when I scrapbook that almost all mistakes can be corrected. Maybe not every one, but definitely this one was an easy one to fix. I put several layers of the color down because I want to build up the color and make it look a little darker in certain spots. In order to fix the pink area that's outside the lines, I use some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. And this is a paint that I really like having on hand, not just to correct mistakes, but also to add some highlights, and I do both on this seahorse. So after I had painted over the pink area that I didn't want, I used a thin brush and I began to paint lines where I wanted the seahorse to look like it had highlights. And I think that adding those white lines helped the seahorse to look a little bit more dimensional. In the past, I've used white paint markers and white gel pens, and those work well too. But I do find that those can be a little bit transparent, whereas this is totally opaque. With the markers, I find that I sometimes have to go over the lines that I make several times before they're as white as I want them to be. And I find with this paint, I don't have to go over and over the lines. However, I think a marker is a little easier to use and even a little easier to control. So it's all a matter of what you feel comfortable with. I wanted to add some texture to this background, so I'm using my all-time favorite stencil, which is Tim Holtz Dot Fade, and I'm adding this in several areas around the layout. I'm using white modeling paste. I really was just interested in texture. I didn't want to add any additional colors to the background. I'm a huge fan, as I said, of this background, so I just thought that adding some texture would be a good place to start this layout. I'm planning on having 3 main clusters on this layout. I thought that it made sense to put one close to the seahorse on the left, and then another one on the right-hand side near the elements that are on the right. There's a branch and I believe a stamp there as well. And I was thinking that a third cluster would look nice on the upper left-hand side of the layout. I was thinking that the texture paste would help to define those areas where I'm going to put the clusters. So you would see the texture paste peeking out from behind the embellishments that I put there. But I also put some texture paste in areas where I didn't plan on putting embellishments. So these are the embellishments that I plan on using on the page. You can see that I have 2 of the dimensional flowers from one of the flower packs. I have my photo, I have a number of flowers, seahorses, a pineapple, a turtle, some shells, and I'm inking the edges of all of these items with vintage photo distress ink. I mentioned that I absolutely love the background, but I did want to add some subtle touches to it. I'm using a dauber and some white acrylic paint, and I'm spreading that paint around mainly the areas where I put the texture paste. I wanted to have a little bit more variation in the color of the texture paste, so I'm lightening some areas up a little bit. And as I began to add the white paint to the texture paste, I realized that I really liked the way it looked, and I started to use it not only to add highlights to the areas where I put down the stenciling, but also to some other areas as well. I don't think I've ever used a dauber to spread acrylic paint before. At times I added a little bit too much paint and then I used some paper towel to help wipe the excess away and then use the dauber to spread out the rest of the paint that was left behind after I wiped it away with the paper towel. And I found that I really liked this effect. It helped to blend some of the areas together and just add a little bit more of a highlight in some areas and a little bit more interest to the background that I thought was already extremely interesting. I continue to add the white paint to the background. I didn't include all the footage because I was at it for quite a while. And then after the white paint dried, I used some watered down black acrylic paint to add just a few little black splatters to the background. I didn't want them to be too dark, but I do like the addition of black splatters, especially when there are black elements on the page. Next, I added one of my very favorite things to the background, which is white splatters. I add another round of white splatters later on toward the end of the process, but I wanted to have some white splatters on the background, so I'm adding quite a few of them all over the background, but I do concentrate them a little bit more in the areas where I plan on adding the clusters. The white paint can sometimes take a little bit longer to dry than some of the other mixed media that I use. The modeling paste dries very quickly and the gesso dries very quickly too, but the white acrylic paint needs some time to dry. So after I add the white splatters to the background, I put it aside and make sure that everything is dry before continuing on. I decided to give that pink seahorse a friend. This is one of the die cuts that we received in the September kit, and I'm popping it up on some foam using the fun foam that has the adhesive on one side, and then I place that right next to the larger pink seahorse. I was thinking of using this circular die cut that I'm adding foam to right now as a frame for my photo, but then I decided to instead use it behind my photo as an embellishment. I put some fun foam on the back of it, and just like the seahorse, I'm giving it a little bit of dimension, and I'm layering it over some of the images on the right-hand side. I see a lot of scrapbookers adding cheesecloth to their layouts with amazing results. I never seem to have those amazing results. I've tried a few times to use cheesecloth, and I usually end up ripping it off the page at some point, but I was thinking that I can't just totally abandon it because I really like the way that it looks on other people's layouts, and if I try hard enough, I can figure out how to use it on mine. So this was the layout where I decided to try it again. I cut the cheesecloth into several long strips, and I'm adding them around the outside of that circular piece that I have on the upper right-hand corner. Even though I'm not sure that I achieved the same look that I was hoping to achieve, I did leave it on the layout and it's there till the end, and I even add some more later on. So sometimes it just takes a couple of tries to get the right results. After I cut the strips of cheesecloth, but before I attach them down to the page, I did try to fray the edges a little bit so that it would look a little bit more natural. In the September kit, we received quite a few of these die cut or laser cut pieces of netting, which I think are fantastic additions to ocean or beach themed layouts. I thought that it would look nice if there was some netting in each of the 3 clusters. I used a little bit of ATG adhesive to attach them down. I wasn't sure if I was going to move them around, and I thought that that would allow me to move them around later if I wanted to, which I do end up doing. I added this really cute turtle in the lower right-hand side of the page. I used some fun foam to pop the turtle up also. Now I'm adding one of the dimensional flowers to each of the 2 larger clusters. I'm going to surround both of those yellow flowers with some of the die-cut flowers. There were a lot of die-cut flowers in this month's kit, which I absolutely love. I love embellishing with flowers. I never seem to have enough. I also added a pineapple to the left-hand side of my photo, along with a little sentiment that says, "The Good Life." The photo that I'm using on this layout was printed on a Canon selfie, and it measures 2 3/4 inches by 3.5 inches. I mounted it on some white cardstock and then again on a small piece of pattern paper. And like everything else on the page, I inked the edges with some distress ink in Vintage Photo, which I find to be a very versatile color, and I use it on a huge percentage of my layouts. I added the yellow and pink flowers to all 3 clusters on the layout. I love that there were these colorful pink shells in a number of different sizes in the kit this month, so I also incorporated those different sized shells into the 3 clusters. I also thought that the sentiments that were black with white writing would look nice in the lower left-hand corner of the layout. So I placed those sentiments below the seahorses. And then my title, which is Paradise, is also from the kit, and I layered that on top of the shell and the flowers that were already in that cluster. Before attaching the title down, I popped it up on some fun foam. I like to save the white fun foam that I get in the multicolored packs for embellishments like these, where there are some areas that are very thin and I don't want the color to be very bright, because sometimes you could see the foam even just from the side when you look at the layout. So I save my white foam for that particular application. Usually, sometimes I use it for other things, but I do like to have it on hand for those applications. And you can see here that I'm again using the white foam for that very small sentiment that says Good Life that's underneath the photo. I attached the sentiment that says Beach Day down to the page, and I added another very tiny pink shell to the bottom cluster. As I was working on the page, I thought something was just a little bit off with it. I was thinking it might be that there was too much netting, so I removed the netting from the cluster that's at the top of the page. I also removed some of the yellow flowers from the center cluster. I think that they were a little bit hidden underneath the seahorse. And then it didn't take me long to put that netting back. It just looked funny to have the netting in two of the clusters, but not the third one. I'm adding some die cut branches now. I die cut some leaves out of some purplish red paper, and I thought that that color went along so well with all the other colors that were on the page. So I don't add a ton of those, but I just wanted there to be a little pop of that color because I think it helped to make all the other colors look a little bit more vibrant. I also added some die cut branches that I had from another project. I just had 3 of them, and I added 1 to each of the 3 clusters. I like the way those branches look tropical, and the color seemed to go along well with the other colors on the page. After I trimmed the netting off of the sides of the page, I had a little scrap to put to the upper left-hand side of the photo. I just think that that balanced it out. I still felt like there was something a little funky about the netting, and I decided that it was probably a little bit too dark for this layout that I've created. So I first tried to dull the color down a little bit by using some Finnabair Metallique Wax. I used 2 different colors. I started out with rich copper, and I also added some aged brass. And although the wax didn't give me the look that I was trying to achieve, I did like the way it added another color and it made it a little bit more shiny, just gave it some variation. But I knew that I had to add something to it to make it look much lighter. So I used some heavy gesso and I used a natural sponge, and I began dabbing the gesso onto the netting. Now I couldn't remove the netting on the left-hand side without disturbing everything. I didn't want to do that. So I took the netting off of 2 of the clusters. I dabbed on the gesso, and then for the cluster on the left-hand side, I put a piece of scrap paper underneath it, and then I applied the gesso while that netting was still on the page. And I think the combination of the gesso with the metallic wax gave me the look that I was looking for. The netting is still visible, but it's not quite as dark. It didn't draw your eye as much as it did before, which was what I wanted to do. Once I fixed the netting, I was a little bit happier with the layout. It was looking a little bit more like I pictured it would. I glued down those 2-dimensional flowers, and then I used the heavy gesso and an old bristle brush, and I dabbed the gesso not only on the dimensional yellow flowers, but on all of the elements that I have in each of the clusters. I'm just adding a very light touch of it. I want to add some highlights, and I want to use the gesso to help to bring all of the elements together. And I always find that adding gesso or splatters helps to make everything look like a cohesive unit. I've been scrapbooking a lot of photos that my daughter took when she went to the Dominican Republic. I guess it was last spring. And I don't really get a chance to scrapbook tropical photos too often. So I consider it kind of a treat to have these really pretty photos to go along with these really beautiful 49 and Market papers. I was also able to use these photos with the July kit because that had a beautiful tropical theme too. That collection was from Prima, and that kit had a beautiful color palette of pinks and greens. Now I'm adding the second round of white splatters. I wanted to have some splatters on the embellishment clusters. And now you could see that I'm adding yet more cheesecloth to this layout. I am cutting small strips of it and tucking them into the cluster on the left. And I also do the same thing to the cluster on the top. And I'm happy to say that I was pleased with the results of adding the cheesecloth. I think that it goes really well with lots of different kinds of layouts, but especially with these sea-themed layouts. I'm using some glossy accents and some pearls in a couple of different sizes to add some accents to those 2 yellow flowers. And I also added some pearls to a couple of areas in each of those 3 clusters. I also wanted to add some sparkle to the page, so I added some of these very tiny jewels. I've been using these a lot lately. They come in strips and I cut them into the individual jewels. They're made by Angel's Crafts and they are called stone stickers. And I added those stickers in and around the large clusters. I like the way the jewels are very tiny, but they still catch the light and they add a little bit of sparkle to the page. Over the course of making the layout, I moved the netting around a lot, so I had to once again trim the excess from the edge. And then I used gel glue to attach down those reddish purple branches that I added a little bit earlier. And that is the final touch. This layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I know this one was a little longer than some of my other videos, and I want to say I appreciate you watching and sticking with it till the very end. I also want to say thank you very much for all of the comments. They are extremely encouraging to me, and I really love reading them and also responding to them. In the description box, you'll find the link to the My Creative Scrapbook website. If you're interested in purchasing a subscription, you can do so there. This is the limited edition kit, but there are also 3 other gorgeous kits that you might want to consider. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.